On the phone, Tim Karr, Senior Director of Strategy for Free Press.
Hey, Sam.
Tim, welcome to the program. This is pretty exciting.
Yeah, this is a big deal, and it's something that we've been working on for 10 years. And you know, we've slowly moved the needle, and we slowly moved the needle further, and we finally got to a point where the Federal Communications Commission is actually doing the right thing with regard to net neutrality.
Yeah. All right. So yesterday, I guess it was, Tom Wheeler. Now we know the president I guess it was mid-November, had come out and reiterated his desire for Title II classification. Tom Wheeler announced that he was going to pursue that yesterday in a post on, and there had been some hints to it over the past couple of weeks, but he was pretty explicit about it in a piece I think he wrote for Wired. Tell us what Title II classification means, and then we can talk about sort of the evolution. I mean, just tell us what that means.
Sure. So Title II is a section under the Communications Act that gives the Federal Communications Commission the authority to treat broadband access providers as what's called common carriers. And if you're a common carrier, that means that you have to connect your customers to the destination that they want to go. Common carriage in telephone services means that when you dial a number, so you want to dial up your favorite pizza place down the street, your phone company has to connect you to your favorite pizza place. They can't reroute your call to Domino's. And it is a principle of two-way communications that protects users of those communications and allows them to really control their own experience. Now, when you transfer that to the Internet, it means that we get to choose whatever websites that we want to go to. If we want to use YouTube, for example, to watch videos, or if we want to use some other streaming service, our Internet access provider, Comcast, can't tell us what sites and services we have to use in order to watch videos online. So this protection makes sure that power over your Internet experience resides with the Internet users and not with these very powerful phone and cable companies.
And now, and we've talked about this on this program. You and I have spoken about it, and I think we've had multiple folks on over the past couple of years talking about this. And we should remind people that this is how the Internet was originally classified. Isn't that the case? That it was in 2003, I guess it was.
Yes.
Michael Powell reclassified it, and that changed the dynamic here?
Yes. Michael Powell was then the chairman of the FCC. Today, he is the president of the National Telecommunications Cable and Telecommunications Association, which
Imagine
is the chief
that. Imagine
yes,
that.
The revolving door spun for Michael. He is now the top lobbyist. But when he was a public servant, in name only, I should say, he decided that he was going to give phone and cable companies a gift, and that gift was to change that classification, change that common carriage classification to another classification that basically gave them a great deal of reign to start tampering and interfering with our Internet connections. And I think you mentioned earlier, this is how the Internet was meant to be. What we're really doing here is trying to fix that mistake, fix Michael Powell's mistake, and make sure that what we take for granted, our ability to go where we want on the Internet without being blocked, becomes the rule of the road. We're really just trying to protect the status quo here, which has been really difficult. And I said it's taken us 10 years to get us to fix this problem.
And in fact, basically what happened is that when President Obama had stated that this was a priority for him in 2008, there was a piece I read today in the Wall Street Journal that sort of detailed what was happening in the White House over those years on this issue. And he was convinced at that time, according to this piece by Larry Summers, to look, don't deal with this. We've got bigger fish to fry, et cetera, et cetera. And the idea was that everybody assumed that the Commissioner Jankowski Julius Jankowski would have done the reclassification. And so people that understand, you've got this statutory framework that has been passed by Congress, and when the reclassification changed, you had in 2008 multiple attempts by the FCC to use their ability to impose regulations within that classification that was challenged multiple times in court. Right, there were 2 court cases where the FCC failed in that respect. And Obama's first chairman at the FCC, Julius Jankowski, was failed in that regard. He tried to structure a net neutrality protection using the old classification, and the courts have just said this: you can't do this. If you want to protect net neutrality, if you want to protect common carriage, you have to reclassify as Title II. Unfortunately, within the White House, there were other people whispering into the president's ear on this matter, one of whom was Larry Summers, who during the 2008 elections, the 2010 midterms, when a lot of this was happening, said, this is too controversial. We don't want to have Comcast angry at the White House right now. Let's soften this rule. And of course, they went ahead with a rule that ultimately failed in the courts. So they're finally, even the White House has come around. And I think the midterm elections that happened in November of last year has something to do with it. I think Obama has, with that weight off his shoulders and without having to worry about getting reelected or pleasing, certain powerful constituencies, he's finally come back to his original commitment as a candidate in 2007. He made a commitment to net neutrality. He's finally come full circle and told the FCC, well, really, if you want to protect internet users, you have to use Title II. And that really changed the calculus within the FCC as well, which is why we are where we are today. And according to this Wall Street Journal thing, Tom Wheeler, who was a former lobbyist for the telecommunications industry, was sort of blindsided by President Obama coming out. Yeah, tell us what you know about that.
He kind of came kicking and screaming to this issue, and it was because of the president, but it was also because there has been an extraordinary grassroots organizing effort around this issue. The FCC was flooded with 4 million comments when it started this proceeding in 2014. That's more people who ever commented on an issue before the FCC in its history. And so there's been this great organizing of internet users who seem by a large majority to support this idea of net neutrality. So they became very engaged, which emboldened the president to come back and become very engaged. So there have been really sort of 4 million points of pressure that have gotten us to this point and convinced Chairman Wheeler that he really had no other option. We finally kind of put him into a box,
right,
from which there was only one door to escape. And after a while, I think he came to realize himself that this solution, Title II, wasn't such a bad thing after all.
I mean, it is fascinating to read his piece in Wired, and I want to go through that. But before we do, there's a couple of things I want to ask you about it, because the big highlight from my perspective on this is that this includes wireless, right? I mean, this includes mobile.
Yeah.
There's no splitting. There was a little bit of game playing. I don't know if this was in the decision a year or 2 years ago or 3 years ago, where it was like, we're going to really clamp down on all the wired stuff. Well, in 5 or 10 years, it's all going to be wireless anyways. But this is both.
Right. And ultimately, when you think about it, it shouldn't really matter how you get on the internet, whether you're using a smartphone, a laptop computer, a desktop computer. That experience should be the same. And now there were some technical limitations with wireless in its capacity to stream data and things like that created that kind of issue, like, well, maybe we should treat these differently. But at the end of the day, your internet experience, whether you get online via one device or the other, should be the same. You should have the ability to determine what you do, where you go, without your carrier trying to get in the way.
So in the piece that Tom Wheeler wrote in Wired, he talks about, they say at one point, my proposal, he writes, will modernize Title II, tailoring it for the 21st century. When I read stuff like that, I always get really nervous, but he goes on to say, for example, there'll be no rate regulation, no tariffs, no last mile unbundling. What do those three things mean?
Well, one of the concerns about Title II is that it gives the agency a whole range of powers. Now, what the net neutrality advocacy community has only wanted is that we want a non-discrimination rule, which is one of those powers extended under Title II. But Title II also allows the FCC to determine rates, require universal service, and a lot of other things. And we've been very clear from the beginning is like, we don't want to go there right now. We're just talking about net neutrality. So the agency has the power, somewhat legal term, to forbear. That means they can say, we're going to invoke Title II, but only these sections of Title II that allow us to protect net neutrality. Now, the industry's concern about being rate regulated or having a universal service requirement where, they have to serve everybody, we're not going to address that right now. We're going to forbear from those. And that's what the FCC is that's what that language means. It means that it's going just to focus on that aspect of the authority. It's going to forbear from the others so the industry doesn't have to worry. And you'll oftentimes hear this phrasing. They'll say, Chairman Wheeler wants to turn the Internet into a public utility. But in fact, the very narrow tailoring of the rule that the chairman has proposed doesn't have those aspects to it. It just looks at this issue of common carriage and non-discrimination.
Well, I can tell you Chairman Seder wants to make it a public utility, but we're not there yet.
No, that's a very valid argument that we should be having. We should be talking about whether or not the Internet is essential infrastructure for the 21st century. I happen to agree with you. I believe that it is. But in the sort of political climate that we're operating in right now, that makes the net, it just complicates the net neutrality argument. I think we need to go there. Absolutely.
Well,
at some point.
I mean, I think that is the that's the future, right? I mean, that's this in some ways that fear that these large telecommunication companies have is founded because it's quite possible that 5 years from now during the if it's the Clinton administration, we could be having this argument that, like, look, it's quite clear now that the rest of the world has moved way past us in terms of what they provide for all of their people, and we need to get on the ball here. But before we get to that part of the conversation, what is last mile unbundling? What does that mean?
Last mile unbundling is related to open access, where it allows numerous competitors to ride on the same infrastructure. I think if you're familiar with the early days of the Internet, when we all had dial-up and we got our Internet connection through our phone line, there was a requirement that numerous providers could offer service to it. In dial-up days, you could choose AOL as your Internet provider. But
CompuServe,
you'd open the phone book and you'd see
right.
40 to 50 options there. And that's because the infrastructure that went into the wire that came into your house was open. It was unbundled so that numerous services could ride on that wire.
So in other words, I've got Time Warner puts the cable in my building, and I could actually buy internet service not just from Time Warner, but I could buy it from any number of companies that would have access to that last mile, as it were, or the coaxial in that building. Right,
and the cable companies have argued, since they spend all that money on getting that cable into your home, then why should they then give over their lines to someone else? So there are arguments for doing that, and I would be happy to also have that debate as well at some point. So but it's not a part of this order, and I think obviously the chairman is playing politics to a degree here because he knows he has to convince a lot of people here. So he's very narrowly tailored this rule to protect net neutrality, prevent discrimination online. However, it's important that he is choosing Title II as the authority because it gives the agency the power to have those conversations in the future. If you take Title II away, you might as well make the FCC a non-entity because the internet is the future of communications for most people. We need an agency that's in place to protect the public interest. Title II classification is the most important policy within the Communications Act that allows the agency to do that.
It is basically the vehicle where all these things have potential in the future. Right?
It is a sound legal foundation that will stand up to court challenges. It's in the Communications Act. The Supreme Court had this argument in 2005.
That's the beauty about this, is that
they said, yes, the FCC can do this. It has the ability to reclassify.
In fact, the Supreme Court not only said they have the ability to do this, the Supreme Court said, if you want to do this, that's what you should do, right? I mean,
exactly.
I mean, this is so much harder to challenge because the Supreme Court is basically this was almost like directed by the court.
Yes, they did, and it was the interesting thing about that is that that was back when Chairman Powell, remember him, back when he reclassified from Title II to Title I. They said that, oh, yes, he can do that. But that same argument holds, and it's upheld by the Supreme Court, that this chairman can go from Title I back to Title II, which is what he's proposing to do. So that is the basis of our legal argument, and that is the reason that if Verizon were to choose to challenge us in the courts, I'm pretty much guaranteed we'd win this one.
Okay, so I want to ask you about the likelihood of that, but first, before we do, so this is supposed to go for a vote on the 26th. We know that it is 3-2, Democrats versus Republicans on the FCC. We know that the other two FCC commissioners, if anything, have been leaning towards this reclassification more than Wheeler. So it is very likely that the vote's going to be 3-2 in favor of this proposal. Is that a fair?
Yes, and as a matter of this importance that the president has spoken out on, you're very, very unlikely that you're going to see a Democrat break rank here. So there's a measure of confidence that that's the way the vote will go. However, we have 3 weeks between now and February 26th, and there is a very good chance, it's a certainty, that these people will be hearing from the phone and cable lobby. They are just cranking up their lobbying machinery, which is very effective. And the next 3 weeks are going to be a fight to try to make sure that those 3 votes hold, and that there are no compromises written into the order, because there is a process of redrafting that goes on as well, so that we don't end up with something that stinks and doesn't give us the protections that Wheeler pledged to uphold in his Wired column.
Give me a sense of like what is that lobbying going to take place? I mean, all right. So according to this Wall Street Journal piece, just so I can catch people up here, what happened was there are 2 guys in the White House who, in the absence of other voices, were basically able to work the inside game. And promoted this. There were people outside the administration. There were, owners of Etsy and of Tumblr who were also, doing some fundraising and had the opportunity to talk to Obama. And that even when they started getting whispers of this, some of the major cable providers tried to get through to Valerie Jarrett and influence it there. So what are they going to do over the next 3 weeks? I mean, are they basically going to call up these commissioners and say, gosh, man, your future, it's all in front of you if you really want it? I mean, what do they do?
They are going to exert all forms of pressure, and it is that kind of direct lobbying where they will be visiting the offices. They will be visiting the White House. They will be visiting the commissioners at the FCC. They will be visiting members of Congress, of course, because they're trying also to pass
that's the other
legislation
thing
in Congress that would take this away. But they also do other things. They spend a lot of money on PR campaigns. You'll be seeing ads. If you're in Washington, D.C., and you turn on your TV, I'm fairly certain you'll be seeing ads that calls, Title II the end of the universe. and they'll be placing ads in print. They hire PR groups to do like social media campaigns, to write op-eds for newspapers. They've been very effective in organizing a lot of the more established civil rights community to not support Title II, which has been a real struggle for net neutrality advocates. So they'll be doing all sorts of tactics. They create front groups with kind of, friendly-sounding names. There was a group called Onward Internet that was advocating for light touch rules that was funded by NCTA. So it's going to be a really interesting time, and we're happy about the Wired piece. We're happy about the current position of the chairman, but we have to keep our champagne on ice. We're not ready to pop the corks yet because they are going to come at us with full force.
So when can you pop the champagne? Is it on the 27th after the vote, or then are you worried at that point that Congress will create some statute that says we're changing the Telecommunications Act, or we're changing Title II classification, and we've put it on a bill to fund cancer treatment for everybody in America, or whatever it is, and it's you can't veto this, President Obama, because you'll be vetoing cancer treatment. I mean, when can you pop the champagne?
Well, if the commitment to Title II holds on February 26th and we get a majority vote at the FCC, we will be popping our corks and we will be celebrating. But it will then transition from the FCC to Congress, where they will have those sorts of attempts to rewrite the rules. I got my hands on a talking point document that the cable industry is circulating in Capitol Hill, and it's all about giving Congress the power to rewrite the Communications Act and take Title II off the table. They're not going to get those types of laws passed before the 26th. I'm very confident. But after this decision is made at the FCC, we are going then to need to shift over to Congress. And it's not just congressional Republicans who have taken a stand against net neutrality. There are a number of Democrats who receive a considerable sum of money in the form of campaign contributions that are on the fence on this issue. So we'll be fighting in Congress to try to kill any legislation that takes away our rights to choose where we want to go online. There's a 2016 general election upcoming. It's possible that this issue could become an issue during the election, so there'll be a lot of work on the electoral side to make sure that we have net neutrality champions who are running for Congress and running for other offices that support our position as well. So this is not going away. We can drink our champagne. We'll have a good night of it, but we'll get up the next morning and we'll just have to keep fighting. This is the way these sorts of policy battles go. But all signs right now are good. It's remarkable how far we've moved this issue, even since January of last year.
It really is. I mean, and there's been an amazing I mean, when you look at you look at everything that your group has done and demand progress, and then people who got to John Oliver's show, like that was huge. You can't underestimate the implications of them crashing the servers at FCC with the comments that were there, and then things like, also it helps to have major online companies behind you on some, with some degree of enthusiasm, ranging. But let me ask you this: so you're the strategist for free, the senior director of strategy for Free Press. You got 3 weeks, right? You want to make sure that at the very least. The political process is very different. The legislative process, very different set of dynamics there. But at the very least, you want to make sure that nothing changes between now and the 26th. What do you do? Do you guys sit around and say, all right, what we got to do is we got to put people outside of the FCC to note every time somebody comes in there with a briefcase or a nice suit and who's going to be offering jobs? Or, I mean, what do we're gonna put people on with video cameras. I mean, what do you do?
Well, we do a lot of those sorts of things. I mean, right now, Free Press is working with Demand Progress and Fight for the Future. We have a website out there called battleforthenet.com, which allows you to track your members of Congress on this issue. In fact, we created an individual web page for every member of Congress, all 535, that tracks their stance on this issue, that lets people call their member of Congress and say, hey, I visited your web page and your record's not so good. You need to support Title II. You need to support net neutrality. So we're keeping pressure on Congress. We're being very vigilant about the FCC and what they're doing, who they're talking to. You're going to see a lot of op-eds from the cable industry in newspapers in Washington and across the country that trot out a lot of their tired talking points. So, we do opposition research. We look at what the cable lobbyists are doing, and we debunk them whenever they come out with an op-ed. We tear it down and we show how it's wrong. And I can tell you they've consistently got their facts wrong on this issue. So this is a full-on campaign where you're working both sides of the aisle. You're working both the House and the Senate. You're working the FCC. You're looking at what the media is doing. You're trying to make sure that you have an opportunity to counter a lot of the op-eds that are going to appear from the cable industry, and also write your own and continue to explain to the American public why this issue should be top of the list for them.
My sense is that it's very unlikely we're going to see any major, like a really intense. If the vote goes down the way that we hope it will, and then there isn't a successful challenge, or reversal, I should say, legislatively, I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't see a lot of court cases. Although who knows with that, particularly now that you have that first district in Washington court, the First Circuit Court, I'm sorry, with a majority of Democrats saying essentially. Or Democratic appointees who will not question the authority of the FCC to do this. Because I wouldn't put it past it, but that the cable carriers or the internet providers are basically going to just adapt and start to plan for this new environment. It is so exciting that this is going to be a moment where 25 years ago you're going to be able to trace new developments in the way that we're connected and in technologies to this fight. It really is exciting, and I would imagine it's incredibly exciting to you.
Yes, it is very. We're very happy. It's been a long, hard fight, and we are very pleased with where we are. And one of the things you mentioned, how the industry will adapt to this. It was interesting that the day that the Wired piece came out, where the chairman basically said, "This is what I'm going to do." If you looked at all of the cable stocks out there, they all went up. So the marketplace didn't seem to be too bothered by this. They didn't think that these types of rules would in any way make the value of these companies go down. And Title II, this rule has been effectively imposed on other parts of the economy where companies are immensely profitable.
Right.
So this doesn't mean, there are a lot of fear-mongering out there that this will turn Comcast into a public utility where it's slow and bureaucratic.
Right, as opposed to the alacrity in which they operate now.
Exactly. And none of that has proven to be true. The industry will adapt. It will continue to
be gives them certainty.
Successful.
Isn't that we've heard
and
forever?
We will have the protections we need.
Right. It gives them certainty. That isn't always the problem, uncertainty. Well, now they have regulatory certainty. If we get this, they know where we're going. Well, Tim, this is. Let me just congratulate you. You folks have been working on this for years and years. And for a long time, there's been a feeling like this is just a fight that could not be won. And congratulations to you, but congratulations to all of us, because it really is exciting to just be at a time where you're going to impact this communications for, years and years and decades. This is going to make a big difference.
Well, thank you, Sam. This is really a victory for the internet public, and I think it's become more and more evident that we are now a political constituency that you can't ignore. Any time we see legislation that tries to impose on our rights to connect and communicate, we will rise up and be heard, and this is important. not only for net neutrality, but for all of the issues related to free speech and communications that we care about.
All right, Tim. Well, again, thanks so much for your time today, and we'll talk to you soon.